The Mysterious Old Radio Listening Society podcast.
Welcome to the Mysterious Old Radio Listening Society, a podcast dedicated to suspense, crime, and horror stories from the golden age of radio. I'm Eric.
I'm Tim.
And I'm Joshua.
We love mysterious old-time radio stories, but do they stand the test of time? That's what we're here to find out.
Today we return to the listener library for a suggestion from our mysterious listener, Mark. Mark writes, I'm a brand new listener, really love the podcast. I'm a huge fan of The Shadow, especially the pulps, but also the radio show. I like how the radio version does a lot of debunking and has more eerie tales. Can't wait for the next Shadow episode. Mark went on to recommend several episodes of The Shadow, and from that list we chose The Case of the Flaming Skull.
As Mark mentioned, the Shadow series was based on the popular Street and Smith pulp magazine of the same name. As portrayed in the pulps, the Shadow was a dark avenger clad in a black cloak, wide-brimmed hat, and a blood-red scarf, utilizing multiple secret identities and a network of loyal agents. The Shadow terrorized the underworld, dealing out his own brand of justice, usually fired from the barrels of his twin .45s.
The character was toned down for the radio, though. He traded his firearms for the ability to cloud men's minds. Instead of an army of well-trained operatives, he relied on his friend and companion, the lovely Margot Lane. His one and only secret identity was Lamont Cranston, amateur criminologist and wealthy young man about town.
The Shadow debuted on the Mutual Broadcasting System September 26, 1937, starring Orson Welles as the Shadow and Agnes Moorehead as Margot Lane. Welles played the role with a brooding intensity, hinting at the more adult Shadow of the pulps. When Welles left the role in 1938, he was replaced by veteran radio actor Bill Johnstone. The older actor brought maturity and a sense of authority to the voice of the Shadow, while at the same time revealing a lighter side to Lamont Cranston, particularly in his interactions with Margot.
This humanizing of the Shadow continued with the casting of Broadway actor Brett Morrison in 1943. He brought a youthful jocularity to Lamont Cranston and a policeman-like sense of law and order to the Shadow. His first season on the show featured an emphasis on mad science and horror, starting with his inaugural story, The Gibbering Things.
Morrison left the Shadow at the end of 1943, but returned a year later. He was the last and longest-running voice of the Shadow, remaining in the role until the series ended in 1954. But who played the Shadow during Morrison's brief departure? Two men, actually, John Archer and Steve Courtley.
John Archer was predominantly a screen actor, appearing in B-movies and the occasional supporting roles in major productions like White Heat with James Cagney. In addition to The Shadow, Archer's voice was also heard on radio's The FBI in Peace and War and the daily soap opera Amanda of Honeymoon Hill.
The majority of Archer's Shadow scripts were written by comic book and science fiction writer Alfred Bester, whose superhero aesthetic suited Archer's square-jawed action hero approach to the role. Many of Bester's scripts recycled elements from stories he penned for DC Comics. The Case of the Flaming Skull, the story you're about to hear, was based on Bester's 1941 Batman story, The Strange Case of Professor Radium. In turn, Bester would later lift material from his 1949 Shadow script, The Man with No Face, for use in his Hugo Award-winning 1952 novel, The Demolished Man.
Archer left the series in April 1945 after one season. His replacement, Steve Courtley, filled in for 8 episodes before Morrison returned permanently to the role. Courtley was a stage and radio actor whose brief appearance and sudden exit from the Shadow is shrouded in mystery. According to our research, none of his episodes survive, or if they do, they're not in general circulation.
The surviving copy of The Case of the Flaming Skull is from Mystery Playhouse, an anthology series created in 1944 by the American Forces Network for the express purpose of entertaining our boys overseas. The show was hosted by Peter Lorre and featured rebroadcast stories from other popular mystery and suspense shows of the day, including The Whistler, Inner Sanctum, Mr. and Mrs. North, and of course, The Shadow.
And now, let's listen to The Case of the Flaming Skull, starring John Archer as the Shadow. First broadcast March 18th, 1945.
It's late at night and a chill has set in. You're alone, and the only light you see is coming from an antique radio. Listen to the sounds coming from the speaker. Listen to the music, and listen to the voices.
A flaming skull floats through the room, and a man disappears. A fortune in jewels stolen while the owner watched. Yet he could see nothing but the skeleton fingers. Crime is rampant, but there is no clue. Nothing but a flaming skull. Hello, creeps. This is Peter Lorre, back again to open the doors of the Mystery Playhouse. And tonight, we have a guest appearance of our friend, the Shadow, one of the most fascinating characters in the business of crime detection. He's the man who is always getting shot in his invisibility. But in this adventure, the case of the flaming skull, the Shadow is nearly made permanently invisible by a skeleton.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows.
The Shadow, who aids the forces of law and order, is in reality Lamont Cranston, wealthy young man about town. Years ago in the Orient, Cranston learned a strange and mysterious secret, the hypnotic power to cloud men's minds so they cannot see him. Cranston's friend and companion, the lovely Margot Lane, is the only person who knows to whom the voice of the invisible Shadow belongs. Today's drama, The Case of the Flaming Skull. A late afternoon thunderstorm breaks over the city. As people run for cover, two men collide as they dash into a small doorway.
Oh, sorry. Oh, that's all right. Cranston. Lamont Cranston.
Why, it's Steve Crane. Hello, Steve.
Lamont, if this isn't the weirdest coincidence.
Haven't seen you for ages, Steve. How's the promising young chemist?
Lamont, listen.
Last I heard, you had a swell job doing research for the Guild
Yes,
Labs. Still with them?
Yes, Lamont.
Married?
Yes. Lamont, listen to me. You won't believe it, but I was on my way over to see you. Lamont, I'm in a jam.
What's the matter, Steve?
I've been walking around all day. I've been going out of my mind. Then I remembered that you used to study occult science and all that, and...
What kind of a jam needs occult scientists?
Lamont, please don't laugh at me, but... I'm going to die.
We all are, sooner or later.
But we don't all get special announcements.
What? You did?
Yes.
When? How?
It was last night. I haven't been sleeping well lately. I've been nervous and high-strung. Been working pretty hard in a new thorium synthesis.
Yes?
About 2 o'clock this morning, I got up for a drink of water. I went into the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and then...
Go on.
I saw a flaming skull staring at me.
You what?
In the darkness, I saw a hideous flaming skull grinning at me, pale and flickering, burning a dull green in the blackness.
Yes?
It was a terrible shock. I suppose I must have passed out. When I came to, it was gone. But I knew, Lamont. I knew it was a warning.
Steve, you're tired, overworked. You can't
It was a
take this
presentiment,
thing.
Lamont. It was a warning.
It was a hallucination. Now, pay attention to Uncle Lamont. You want my advice?
Yes, of course.
All right, here's the address of a friend of mine, Dr. Neil Harrison. He specializes in your kind of case. Too much work and too much imagination. Now, you go see him at once.
Then you don't think that skull was...
My dear Steve, I speak now as an occult specialist. The most horrible presentiment in the world can be dispelled with bicarbonate of soda and 2 weeks in the country. Hello.
Is this Mr. Cranston?
Yes.
This is Helen Grant, Steve's wife.
Oh, yes, Mrs. Grant.
Oh, Mr. Cranston, can you come over to our house right away?
Come over to you. Oh, what time is it, Mrs. Grant?
Oh, it's 5 o'clock, almost dawn. I know it's an unusual request, Mr. Cranston.
Well, anything wrong?
Yes.
With Steve?
Yes.
What's happened?
He's been kidnapped.
Oh, Mr. Cranston, I'm so glad you're here. I've been half out of my mind.
No. Take it easy, Mrs. Grant. Suppose I come in and you tell me all about it.
Yes, come in. Please sit down, Mr. Cranston.
Oh, thank you. Now, Mrs. Grant, from the beginning.
Well, it was about midnight. I'd gone to bed and been asleep for a few hours. And suddenly I woke. I heard a sound, an awful sound.
What was it?
Well, it was a sobbing, crying noise. It seemed to come from Steve's bedroom across the hall.
What did you do?
Well, I got up and went to the door of my room. I opened it. It was dark in the house. And in the blackness, I saw...
Yes, what?
A flaming skull.
You're sure of that?
Yes, it was a little distance away. It was coming out of Steve's room, floating in the air. It burned with a green, flickering flame. It was ghastly.
What did you do?
I screamed. Then I fainted. When I came to, it was gone. I rushed into Steve's room to tell him, and Steve was gone, too.
I see.
All his clothes were in his room. Everything. He hadn't packed and left. It's obvious he was taken away. Taken by that horrible skull. I didn't know what to do. But last I remembered, he'd said something about you being an expert in the occult and weird things. So I called you.
Well, I'm glad you did, Mrs. Grant.
But what are we going to do, Mr. Cranston?
No. Don't worry. We're going to find Steve.
How about it, Miss Lane? Is Cranston fooling you with this ghost story?
I don't know yet, Commissioner. I want to hear the rest of the story.
Well, that's all there is. First, Grant came to me with a story about a flaming skull, then Mrs. Grant.
Was it kidnapping, Lamont?
Well, perhaps. I checked Steve's room. All his clothes were there, his shoes, everything.
What is that supposed to prove?
Well, his identification papers were there. Licenses, checkbooks, everything. It doesn't prove much, except that Grant didn't walk out of the house voluntarily. A man might cook up an ingenious plan like this to leave his wife, but he doesn't leave all of his money, papers, and important documents behind.
Yeah, that's right.
How about the sobbing, crying noise Mrs. Grant heard?
Well, I couldn't find anything to account for that.
So we're left with exactly this. A guy disappears, and he and his wife tell a crazy yarn about flaming skulls, and we're supposed to believe that said skull kidnapped the man.
That explanation will do until a better one comes along, Commissioner. Got a better one?
Sure, I got a better one. The obvious one. Grant and his wife cooked up the story to beat the insurance company.
He isn't insured.
Then he's trying to get publicity for some crazy invention he made.
He was a research chemist working for the Guild Labs. He made no invention, and if he did, it would belong to the Guild company and not to him.
I don't believe you or Grant or his wife, and I don't believe in flaming skulls either. You can chew on that for a while. Weston? Yeah. What? Say that again. Well, I'll be... Okay, coming right over.
What is it, Commissioner? You look startled, to say the least.
That phone call has just dropped a bomb in my lap, Miss Lane.
Now, let's have the explosion.
Adam Edwards, the broker, has just reported a burglar in his home. $15,000 in cash was stolen.
Why, Commissioner, a $15,000 robbery is no explosion.
Yeah? Well, maybe you'll get a bang out of this. The dough was stolen by a flaming skull. Mr. Edwards, I'm Commissioner Weston.
Yes, pleased to meet you, Commissioner.
This is Lamont Cranston, Miss Margot Lane.
How do you do?
I brought them along because they happen to be interested in flaming skulls, too.
You've seen the apparition, Mr. Cranston?
Yes.
Suppose you let us have the story, Mr. Edwards.
Well, it's quite simple and quite frightening. I was awakened this morning about 3 o'clock by the sound of a body moving about in my study.
Uh-huh.
Now, it's a well-known fact that I keep large sums of cash in the house. I assumed that some ill-advised burglar was after my money.
Why ill-advised?
Well, I'm a crack shot, Mr. Cranston. I have a license to keep a revolver in the house. I immediately arose and got the gun and tiptoed toward the study.
And then?
I opened the door very carefully, and in the darkness I saw a flaming skull hovering over my desk. while flaming skeleton hands rifled the drawers.
Oh, so now a pair of hands are added to the skull. Pretty soon we'll get the whole skeleton.
What did you do, Mr. Edwards?
Well, I hadn't lost all my nerve. I fired, but I'm afraid my aim wasn't very good.
Yes?
Instantly, the skull and hands rushed off through the darkness. I tried to follow. I heard the thing blundering around the far side of the study, and before I could catch up, it was gone. And so was my money. That's all.
That's too much for me. What is this, a conspiracy? Are you all trying to pull my leg?
You don't believe my story, Commissioner?
Frankly, no.
I see. All right, come this way, please. I have something to show you.
What?
You see, I'm an amateur photographer. I had this closet fitted up as a darkroom. The door to it is right next to the study door. Evidently, the flaming skull blundered into the closet by mistake.
I still don't see what all this has got to do with the skull.
I want you to come into the darkroom, please. I'm sorry, but this red light here is all the illumination I can give you.
It's enough, Mr. Edwards. Go ahead.
Now, when the intruder came into this room last night, he apparently dislodged one of my unexposed plates and knocked it into the developer tray. I want you to look at this plate, Commissioner. Tell me what you see on it.
Ha! Cranston.
It's a skeleton hand. Well, this is a fine thing, Mr. Cranston. A fine thing indeed.
What's eating you, Margot?
What's eating me? It's a question I've been wanting to ask you. You sit around like a bump on a log all day.
I was thinking. No, worrying about the flaming skull.
Suddenly, at 7 o'clock tonight, you announce we're going for a drive. Where?
To visit a friend.
Why?
To pick up a clue on this case.
Who's the friend?
Dr. Neil Harrison. I sent Steve Grant to see him yesterday afternoon. It's just possible that Steve might have said something to Dr. Harrison that would give us a clue.
Then all that worrying, thinking this afternoon didn't help? No inspiration?
It certainly did help, Margot, but right now the fire of inspiration needs a little more coal.
To be shoveled on by Lamont Cranston Stoker.
No. Lamont Cranston, Shadow.
Next patient, please. Yeah, that's odd. Waiting room's empty. I could have sworn I heard a patient come in. Who's that?
Your patient, Dr. Harrison.
Patient? Where?
An invisible patient, Doctor.
Why, this is absurd. It's some trick. Who are you?
Men call me the Shadow.
The Shadow?
You have heard of the Shadow, Dr. Harrison. The Shadow seeks only one thing. The truth.
The truth about what?
The truth about all things. The truth about Steve Grant.
Grant? Oh, yes.
He came to you yesterday?
Yes, Lamont Cranston sent him.
You treated him?
No, I did not.
Why not? The truth, Dr. Harrison.
Yes, I'll tell the truth. I could not treat him. He was...
Dr. Harrison! He's dead. Shot by somebody from outside that window.
Lamont! Where are you, Lamont?
Right here, Margot.
I heard shots while I was waiting in the car.
Someone fired through the window while the Shadow was questioning Dr. Harrison. The doctor's dead. Now, come on, we've got to locate that killer if we can.
But it's pitch dark, Lamont.
Careful. He must have run off this way.
Do you know who killed the doctor?
No, I'm afraid we'll never find out now.
Lamont!
Yes, Margot.
Look, running down the street. Way up there. Oh, Lamont!
Yes, I see it, Margot.
It's a flaming skeleton.
Oh, yes, the Shadow will be back in just a moment. You know, one of the most mysterious things about this program is just what this announcement is doing in the middle of it. But you don't have to be the Shadow to figure out the answer. They just want somebody to say that if you write your letters V-mail, they'll get there faster, take less space on crowded transports, and make more folks at home happy because you can write shorter letters, but more of them. So for fast communication with home, V-mail. And now, back to the shadow.
Oh, why did I ever meet you, Cranston? Why did I ever lay eyes on you?
Commissioner, you're not blaming Lamont for the flaming skull.
Flaming skeleton now, Margot.
No, I'm just complaining that he gets me mixed up in the screwiest crime.
Well, there's nothing screwy about this. Harrison was killed by a .38 caliber slug fired through that window. What could be more realistic than that?
Nothing, except that you claim a glowing skeleton finger pulled the trigger.
We saw the skeleton, Commissioner.
Oh, I believe you, Miss Lane. Too many people have seen it for me to hang on to that hallucination theory. I only wish I could see it for once.
Commissioner.
Yes?
Commissioner.
Yes, what is it, Cardona?
We've just picked up a flash from one of the patrol cars.
Yes?
They've spotted the flaming skull just breaking into the Zircon jewel store on State Avenue. He's in there now, and if we rush, we can get over there in time to trap him coming out.
Now, let's go, Commissioner. Maybe this time you'll see the skeleton.
Where is this Zircon jewel store? How much further, Cardona?
Just around the next corner, Commissioner.
I only hope we're there in time.
Yes, I wouldn't want the Commissioner to lose the pleasure of meeting Mr. Skeleton.
All right. Stop here, Cardona. We'll walk the rest of the way.
Yes, sir. I can see the police patrol car up ahead.
Then Mr. Skeleton must still be inside the store.
Come on. And remember, let's keep quiet. This is our big chance.
Commissioner!
What in blazes are those maniacs?
Hey, look, he's coming out.
It's the flaming skeleton, Commissioner.
Hey, come on, let's go. Get hold of him, you men. Don't let him get away.
They're shooting wild, Commissioner.
Well, I can't blame them. Saints alive, but that's a nasty thing to see in the dark.
He's getting away.
Faster.
Oh, it's no use, Commissioner. We'll never get him. No one will ever get him.
Don't turn superstitious on me, Cardona.
Cardona's right, Commissioner. The skeleton's vanished.
We couldn't hold him, sir. We did the best we could. He got by.
Now, this is a fine thing. What's the matter with you nursery babies? Afraid of a skeleton?
It's not that, Commissioner.
Isn't it obvious, Commissioner? This flaming skeleton is a startling, bewildering sight. The shock of seeing it checks everyone just long enough to give the skeleton a few seconds leeway for escape.
That's it, Mr. Cranston.
Okay. Let's get back to the Zircon store and see how much Mr. Skeleton got away with this time.
Now, wait.
What now?
Apparently, our thief didn't get away with all he took.
Huh?
Look on the ground here.
Well, Lamont, 3 little jewels.
I got them. Holy smoke. They're diamonds.
Diamonds, that color?
Yes, Commissioner. They've turned blood red.
Oh, Lamont.
Yes?
Stop pacing up and down and listen to me.
Got an idea?
Mm-hmm. Suppose we get some sleep. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, Lamont. How much longer are we going to sit here and think?
Until I can figure out 3 things.
We're not going to go through all that again, are we?
Why was Steve Grant kidnapped? Why was Dr. Harrison murdered?
Because they knew something about the flaming skeleton.
Yeah, but what?
You know the answer to that. You told me yourself. It's tied up with a photograph of the skeleton hand and the diamonds that turned red.
But why did those diamonds turn red? How was that photograph made?
I'm going home.
Only Harrison had taken Grant on as a patient.
Didn't he?
No. He told the shadow he couldn't treat him.
Oh, what difference does that make?
Well, if he'd taken Steve as a patient, he might have left a record of some kind. This way, his information died with him.
Oh, I'm going home.
Oh, that's the door. I'll take it.
Who in the world could that be so early?
Oh, Mrs. Grant, come in.
Mr. Cranston, I just got...
Oh, this is Miss Lane. She's working with me on the case. Margot, Mrs. Grant.
How do you do,
Hello.
Mrs. Grant?
What's wrong, Mrs. Grant?
Oh, Mr. Cranston, I'm frightened.
Why?
The flaming skull.
What about it?
Oh, I think I'm going to be the next victim.
You?
What makes you think so, Mrs. Grant?
I've had warnings.
You've seen the skull?
No, but I've seen the warnings. Mr. Cranston, since the night that Steve was taken, my whole house has been glowing.
How do you mean that?
Oh, when I put the lights out, objects flame up and glow with a weird green color. Steve's watch and the money on his desk, spoons, silver, many things.
Golly.
Then last night I decided I'd sleep in Steve's room. I thought if the flaming skull came back, I'd be waiting.
Did you see it? Did it come back?
Well, I didn't see it, but I know it was in the room.
How do you know?
Look at my arms.
Oh, golly, they're covered with burns.
Burns?
Look, Lamont. It's as though a skeleton hand had clutched Mrs. Grant, or the hand of some mythological god like Thor.
What?
I said like...
Yeah, you said Thor.
Yes.
Thor, what an idiot I've been. Steve practically told me the answer to this case when I first met him.
Oh, what do you mean, Lamont?
I mean, I know all about the flaming skeleton. Come on, Mrs. Grant. We're going to police headquarters.
All right, now what do you want me to do about Mrs. Grant, Cranston?
Well, here's the setup. You're to take Mrs. Grant into protective custody. It's to be kept a secret.
Why?
You'll find out soon enough. At 6 o'clock tonight, I want you to release this news item to the papers. I've written it out for you.
Well, not so fast, Cranston. Now, you're making me dizzy.
Now, listen, Commissioner. Do you want to get your hands on the flaming skeleton?
What a question.
Then do exactly what I've told you.
Then what in blazes are you going to do?
I'm going to trap the flaming skeleton.
Broadcast. In an attempt to protect the wife of Steve Grant, the police have taken Mrs. Grant into protective custody. She's being held under close guard at the old mansion house outside the city. There, in a lonely building, set in lonely fields, the widow of Steve
Turn it
Grant...
off, Margot. Oh, that's fine. What time is it?
8 o'clock.
Then Mr. Skeleton's known the news for 2 hours. He'll be here soon.
Here at the mansion house?
Right. Under the misapprehension that Mrs. Grant is here, too.
But he's only going to find just us folks, just the two of us.
The 3 of us, Margot. You're forgetting the shadow.
Oh, say, shouldn't you be the shadow now? Suppose our flaming skeleton walks in unexpectedly.
He can't. We'll have plenty of warning of his coming. I've run a circuit of electricity in a circle around the field surrounding this house.
But how will that warn us?
Well, there are 4 concentric rings circling this house, Margot. Each is made of a single wire carrying enough current to signal when Mr. Skeleton steps over it. We'll hear the signals on this electroscope connected with the circuits.
But wouldn't any person crossing those circuits cause the signal to sound?
Not any person, Margot. Just Mr. Skeleton.
Why?
Because of the peculiar constitution of his body, you see. Hold it. That's the electroscope.
Mr. Skeleton?
Yes, he's inside the outermost circuit. He's inside the 2nd circuit. He's inside the 3rd. You know what to do?
Yes, I'm supposed to put out the lights and hide in the closet alongside the switch.
Right. When Mr. Skeleton gets into this room, the electroscope signals will reach a peak and then cut off automatically.
Then I'm supposed to switch on the lights again.
Oh, he's inside the 4th circuit. Get moving, Margot.
Lamont,
Don't argue. This man is dynamite. Put out the lights.
Right.
I'll get in the closet. Stand by.
What's that? Who's there? Don't move.
Good evening, Steve Grant.
Who's that?
The Shadow.
The Shadow? I can't see who.
No man sees the Shadow. But all men see you, Mr. Skeleton.
You know Shadow?
The Shadow knows everything. You were a foolish man, Grant. A fool.
I was desperate. When Dr. Harrison told me I'd caught radium poisoning, that the salts were in my blood and bones, that death was waiting 2 months off,
You sought for revenge on the world?
No, I thought only of my wife. She had nothing. There was no money, no insurance, nothing. I had to raise something for her. I couldn't leave her penniless.
You had no right to rob.
There was no other way to raise money.
You had no right to kill.
There was no other way to keep my secret. I couldn't let her discover her husband was a thief. She would never have kept the money I was raising for her.
She will have no part of anything you've stolen.
For heaven's sake, you can't betray me.
The Shadow seeks justice. Justice. There will be justice for your wife. But there must be justice for those you have robbed and those you have killed.
No. Listen, I'm going to die anyway. I'll pay for the deaths, pay with my own.
There must be justice, Grant. You must give yourself up.
You'll never take me. I warn you, I've killed before. I'm not afraid to kill now.
You're mad, Grant. You must pay in full.
No!
Can you, a flaming skeleton, kill an invisible shadow?
Wherever you are, I'll kill you.
Kill the shadow with what? Stop, Grant. You can't escape the shadow.
Try and stop me.
Stop, Grant.
Shadow!
Stay here, Margot. Keep out of this.
There he goes, across the field. You can see the glowing skeleton running.
Keep back, Margot.
Why? What's wrong?
Grant is running toward the high-tension wires on the road. If he gets too close to that tremendous current... Stop, Grant! Stop running!
You'll never stop me. No one will ever stop me.
If you value your life, don't move another step. Stop!
Shadow.
Yes, Margot. He's dead.
Well, let's get back to town and notify Commissioner Weston, Margot.
Oh, Lamont, it was awful to be electrocuted that way.
Perhaps it's just as well, Margot. Fate simply anticipated the state executioner.
Lamont, I can't understand it. What happened to Grant?
He was experimenting on radium salt called thorium.
Oh, that's why the mention of the god Thor put you on the right track.
Yes, Margot. Grant apparently became infected with enough radium salt to poison him. When he first saw the flaming skull grinning at him, it was his own face he saw in the bathroom mirror. Dr. Harrison must have explained the truth to Grant. Grant turned desperate and tried to raise money to leave his wife.
And he killed Dr. Harrison before the doctor could tell the police the truth about the flaming skeleton.
Yes, but I should have realized the truth sooner. Naturally, radium emanations are the only thing that can make a man's bones shine in the dark. Radium explains how Edward's photographic plate was exposed. Radium accounts for the diamonds that turned color. Radium emanations change the color of precious stones.
So when you had that news broadcast made about his wife being at Mansion House, you knew that it would trap him.
Well, of course, his only thought was for his wife. That's the explanation of the sound she heard that night he vanished. She heard poor Steve crying hysterically. When she got up and opened the door, she didn't see a skeleton kidnapping Steve. She saw poor Steve leaving.
Not poor Steve. Poor Mrs. Grant.
Don't worry about her, Margot. The shadow may be just, but he's also merciful.
The shadow is going to temper his justice with mercy?
Yes, and the name of that mercy is Cranston's bankroll.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
Hey, careful with that laugh, Shadow. Careful. You might scare somebody. But quickly now. Let's go to the green room for a preview of our next production in a Mystery Playhouse. Follow me. Come. Come.
Well, Doctor, what did you find out?
Several interesting things. Here in town and at the cottage.
I'm sure the girl's all right.
Quite pretty, too, eh? Well, cheer up. The mystery started before her time. Your pretty little miss and her ailing father have been living at the cottage just 10 days. The girl's name is Felice Marchot. She and her father are refugees. But long before that, a Mr. and Mrs. Turner lived there.
Oh, yes?
They kept to themselves a great deal.
I see.
Mrs. Turner, it seems, was not an American like her husband. She was dark, exotic-looking, rather Asiatic, but certainly attractive.
How long ago was this?
4 months ago.
Well, then what had they to do with it?
Now, be patient. One day the Turners left and never came back. The cottage was then occupied by new tenants, but they soon vacated.
Why?
They claimed the cottage was haunted.
Haunted?
Yes.
Does Felice say the cottage is haunted?
No, but of course she's only been there a short time. But to get back to the Turners, it seems they left very early in the morning.
Yes.
Nobody actually saw them go. Mr. Turner has been seen since, but I can't find anybody who has seen Mrs. Turner.
Oh.
I've even called Mrs. Turner's friends in New York, and no one has seen her.
You mean that Mrs. Turner was not... Can't be.
No. Well, the influence of anyone at the point of death, especially a violent death, upon their surroundings is very strong.
You mean those cries I heard?
Precisely. I'm afraid, my boy, that you, and only you, can solve the strange disappearance or murder of Mrs. Turner.
Do the voices of the dead come back? Perhaps you'll find an answer in a mystery of the blue jar. Until next time, then, this is Peter Lorre, closing the doors of the Mystery Playhouse. Good night. Sleep tight. This is the Armed Forces Radio Service.
That was The Shadow and the episode The Case of the Flaming Skull here on the Mysterious Old Radio Listening Society podcast. Once again, I'm Eric.
I'm Tim.
And I'm Joshua.
That was a listener request coming to us from Mark. Thank you so much, Mark, for your request. I'll start this discussion with Peter Lorre introducing The Shadow. I would like to let you know, Joshua, that you probably only have 2 wishes left.
I know. And it's Peter Lorre speaking in this hushed, reverent tone about the shadow. It's like some sort of OTR ASMR, kind of strangely relaxing and stimulating at the same time.
It's got to be your favorite episode of Old Time Radio ever. You had to be in heaven.
I
There's
really
a
did.
point where he's talking about that the shadow is the person who is shot when he's invisible, but sometimes he's going to be made invisible permanently. That I'm like trying to track the logic of. You've wandered off script here. I think there's something went wrong.
I think so. And he's like, just keep talking. Everything will be fine.
So, Mystery Playhouse, before we move on to this episode of The Shadow, I understand that it's a repackaging old-time radio with Peter Lorre as the host. And it struck me that that's not much different than what we're doing with this podcast.
Hello, creeps.
Wouldn't it be great if at the end Peter Lorre discussed this? That was okay, I guess. If you like the channel.
There was a lot of tropes. It was lazy writing. What I want to know about Mystery Playhouse, though, is they did nothing original. It was all just repackaged.
Right. Yeah.
The end of this was a rabbit hole for me because they mentioned the next episode was...
that was like this lengthy preview of...
of the case of the blue jar or something like that. And then I was like, well, what is that? And then I found out, it's an Agatha Christie short story. And then I found out it just recently became public domain. And, ready? I read it.
What?
I know. I don't remember
with
any
your
of it. With my eyes
and your brain.
All right, I'm lying. There's a podcast out there that someone read it to me.
That'd be a great podcast. Let's read things to Eric.
It was Pseudocast, I think, or Pseudopod, or something like that. It's out of England, and they read short stories to you or something. I don't understand the podcast, but I listened to the guy read it to me, and I said, "Great, I don't have to read." All right, let's get back into this: The Shadow and the case of the Ghost Rider. Right? No, wait, the Flaming Skull.
It's a very Batman villain.
Yeah.
It's basically like Walter White from Breaking Bad if he were a Batman villain.
I totally was thinking like, this is Dr. Phosphorus from Batman. And I looked it up and Dr. Phosphorus is from 1970s. I guess it's not a Batman villain. But then twist, it is a Batman villain.
It's probably the Batman villain Dr. Phosphorus was based on. Because radium wasn't as cool in 1970s as it was in the early 40s.
Phosphorus was huge in the 70s.
So
totally.
knowing nothing about what you guys...
sea monkeys.
Knowing nothing what you guys are talking about, I wrote down in my notes as I was going along, trying to guess what was going on. I wrote, it's phosphorus. I wrote phosphorus a number of times. I never came to radium, but I thought, that's what it is. It's got to be he's dealing with phosphorus and he's glowing. When you look up, by the way, radium poisoning.
Don't.
Yeah. Well, the first 2 pages are called The Radium Girls.
Oh, yeah. You know the story that they painted the dials. Oh, that's the first you heard of it? And they
first
would
I heard of it.
Little mustaches on their face, and they would do it with their makeup, and their faces fell off from cancer. It's horrific.
It's horrific. They died horrific deaths.
And that's what this is riffing on, I think, to a certain degree, is that by that time it was a popular story.
Not the details, but the
it's a play,
story.
And I didn't know anything about it, but I couldn't find anything on radium poisoning. The reason I was looking up radium poisoning is because I wanted to find out, do your bones glow when you get radium poisoning? Why is this happening? And I couldn't find... I have a limit. 3 Google pages... and I'm done researching. If I can, and it was 3 pages of Radium Girls. Good. We should know that story. I'm not ripping the Radium Girls. I don't want any emails. But I couldn't find out anything about radium poisoning, and does it make you glow? Anybody know anything about this, or did they make it up for this episode?
I think this is a pretty exaggerated episode of The Shadow. It's very comic book. And Alfred Bester, he wrote a lot of the episodes for this era of The Shadow. It's also the era that was reproduced by the Australian version of The Shadow. Alfred Bester is the one who wrote the sci-fi version of The Shadow that we listen to.
Mm-hmm.
Out of this world.
Right. And as I've come to know, because I know you guys and you accidentally teach me things, Alfred Bester is a big deal in comic book world, right?
He contributed a lot of major characters to the DC comic
I don't know
universe.
he gets necessarily credit for all the things he did, but he did a lot of things.
And somewhere down the line in this podcast, because you introduced me to him, I ended up watching an interview with him from the 70s. It was on YouTube. And it was about a half an hour at some early Comic-Con kind of thing.
Wow.
Yeah, I watched the whole interview. It was super weird. He was weird. He's a weird dude.
Yeah, our Patreon supporter, David, is a huge fan. He might have shared that link.
Oh, maybe that was it. Fine, I didn't find it myself.
Clicked it. But I think this is a far more successful and fun comic book style story by Bester than Out of This World.
Yes.
And we don't need to take an extra round of beating up on Out of This World, but I will say that I like this story a lot more.
It's, how do I say this without it sounding like a criticism?
It's bad.
No, it's a very typical Shadow story. There's a guy, there's this thing.
Well, the thing
he
is, the
solves
Shadow
it.
ran for so long, I don't know if there is a typical Shadow story.
Yeah.
It's very typical of this era, where the villains had a sci-fi element to them. I mean, it's not a gangster or just a guy out to murder people for the money. I think what elevates it to me is that tragic backstory.
Right.
That the villain realized he was poisoning himself at work. He's going to die, and he wants to leave money for his wife. And that's unlike anything I've heard in the Shadow. No, not unlike anything, but it's rarer.
I guess I'm never going to explain what's in my head on this. Somehow I just went, yep, good. That was good. But that was very shadowy in a certain sense. And
Scratched the shadow itch you might have had.
Yeah, it was, there's a guy, he did some bad stuff. You found him, he got him.
It's a terrible band. Don't go see him, Shadow Itch.
Oh.
Yeah, but the cover band, Lamont Cranston itch, really good.
Will someone explain to me, what was the reference she made to Thor, and why would you make that reference when there was a handprint on you? Like, oh, there's a handprint on me, like the god of thunder, Thor. What did she say?
It was a really stilted bit of dialogue to make Lamont Cranston realize thorium, which is named after Thor, which is the connection to radium. It was his aha moment. Even though no one would say that.
I got that, but that's the problem is no one would say, hey, that handprint's like the mark of Thor.
It's like you were roughed up by Thor. We got a little look into like Margot's dream life.
Yeah, it was very stilted, forced.
Yeah.
There was a similar, again, when it's really awkward, I enjoy it. At the very top, when he runs into this guy and like, oh, let's quick exchange information. I was going to meet you. Like, hey, how's the work job at the chemistry thing going? Oh, you're married. Like, could you stop giving exposition for like 2 seconds so I could actually talk to you?
Yeah, right. It's a great little atmospheric opening, though, with the thunderclap and having them accidentally bump into each other standing under a doorway because of the rain. And it's just this picture you can really imagine for radio.
Yep.
Like you said, it's a pretty standard opening exposition conversation, but it forces you to imagine it in this very colorful, specific way.
And I was delighted with the, hey, are you still an occult scientist?
Shadow's like, why, yes, I am.
On my way to see you. I'm more of a man about town these days, but I still dabble.
So I love Lamont's reasoning that Steve Grant wouldn't kidnap himself because, a man might cook up an ingenious scheme like this to leave his wife.
Right.
But he doesn't leave all his money, documents, and important papers behind. His wife on the trash heap. Yeah.
Right.
Flaming skull routine, typical leaving your wife. You don't go, honey, I'm going to go out and get some cigarettes and a flaming skull. I'll be right back.
Maybe a job that offers insurance.
A really good insurance that kicks in tomorrow. The commissioner in this episode, for some reason, he reminded me, and I could only picture the cop that Perry Mason is always dealing with in the Perry Mason TV shows. And I can't remember the cop's name, Do you know the old guy that's always giving him like, oh, Perry's here again. Oh, what do you want?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, Weston is particularly sarcastic and
Ineffectual.
droll. Yeah, but at least he's funny because usually he's ineffective and he's not that interesting. Here, he's really quite funny. So I think he adds a level of entertainment value. If you're going to have an incompetent cop, he should also be an entertaining incompetent cop.
If we can't have accurate law enforcement, at least some entertainment.
What's interesting is that Weston at the beginning is suspicious of the Grants, that they might be involved in this kidnapping themselves. And I thought that was a really clever thing to pop in there early on because he turns out to be right. He isn't vindicated.
No.
It's not exactly right, but because he has so many other wrong things he says in between. But
Lieutenant Tragg. Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Played by Ray Collins. That's who I kept picturing.
Ray Collins, a radio actor as well.
Could it have been Ray Collins playing the commissioner? Because, man, it sounded like him. But it's that same style. Cantankerous.
Crusty, cranky cop.
Makes J. Jonah Jameson look like a...
Old softy.
Old softy. Thank you. Well, any other thoughts,
Well,
gentlemen?
let's talk about John Archer. He was pretty generic.
Yeah, I didn't get pulled out of my shadow enjoyment from his performance.
No.
So, consequently, I thought it was great. Halfway through, I forgot that wasn't Morrison or any of the others.
The one thing for me, which was the laugh.
Yes, the
Ha
laugh.
ha 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 ha.
And Peter Lorre, what does he say? It was, hey, careful with that laugh, Shadow. You might scare someone.
Probably not. He just plays them, though, as a pretty straightforward human being. He's like a cop who occasionally turns invisible.
Right.
For no real purpose.
Right.
We've talked about this before, but he interrogates the psychologist as the Shadow for no real reason.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
He's a friendly witness, right? So there's no reason to come to him as the Shadow.
Why are you scaring the hell out of me?
That
I would have
it's
told
right
you
before
this.
the commercial break, so he feels compelled to like, crap, I haven't been the Shadow yet. And so the poor shrink gets the worst of it.
Right, he scares the
And it has those weird qualities that go throughout Shadow that always jump out at me.
He speaks of the Shadow in the third person.
Speaks of the Shadow in the third person, and like, oh, there's three of us. And Margot has to just go, yeah, your friend, the Shadow.
Does he go to restaurants and say, how many will be joining you? 3.
I'll have the filet mignon.
This era of the Shadow also has a very weird announcer who chooses to emphasize syllables in a strange way. Did you notice that, or is it just me? When he's talking about the Shadow turning invisible, he emphasizes so they cannot see him. And the only person who knows to whom, it's like he maybe just got this one shot at being an announcer in the Shadow, and he was going to somehow really stand out.
What do you got, kid? What makes you different? I put the emphasis on the wrong syllables.
It struck me as kind of strange.
I didn't catch it, but I'll back you up on that. That was strange.
I also enjoyed how the script went out of its way to defend the cops who can't shoot the flaming skull.
I like that too.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting. Where it was like
I sympathize. Like, oh, flaming skull,
and that's how he's able to get away every time. Is that the cops are so shocked.
I did like that moment because the commissioner was mad at him. Are you guys scared of a flaming skeleton?
They're like, yes, we are.
Yes. And the Shadow's like, well, yeah.
And it helps take the edge off that comic book quality of if people react to it not as the one level up from human of like, oh, it's a flaming skull. More as that's a really alarming, disturbing thing to see.
Right. Which I don't quite understand still why it was flaming and why we could see his bones, but I'm going to let it go.
It's a comic booky exaggeration of science.
You know why I didn't give a second thought to, because I've seen Dr. Phosphorus. I've seen the drawings of what this is.
I see. Should we vote?
Oh, I just want to mention the weirdly off line about justice is served, but it will be like tempered by Cranston's bankroll. It's just
that was a little too real.
Yeah, it's a
I
great
could buy justice.
It's a great idea that Cranston's going to supply the money to the Flaming Skull's widow, but he's so pleased with himself. Yeah, I got money coming out of my butt. The Flaming Skull's widow can have it. Little crass is what it came off.
Yeah, absolutely. I just haven't got the image of money coming out of my butt.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I wish.
Theater of the mind, ladies and gentlemen.
That's what it's like to be an ATM.
Last legitimate comment about The Shadow. I did, for audio, love, even though it was kind of too intricate, the concentric circles that The Shadow set up to warn them of the approach of the Flaming Skull. It was a great audio device, and they were all had a slightly different tone. So you heard the first one keep going after the second one was triggered, and it was just a really ominous, nice piece of audio.
Yeah,
I agree. There's a lot I do love about this, and as I'll just start a votey thing here.
Yeah.
That's, I think that it stands the test of time. It's a lot of fun, as always. It's The Shadow. I love learning about the Mystery Playhouse and it being sandwiched by Peter Lorre. And then what does he say in the middle?
We're in a Peter Lorre sandwich.
Theater of the mind, ladies and gentlemen. What does he say in the middle? Like, oh, why do we have to stop? I can't remember the exact line.
I don't get paid enough.
Are they trying to smooth over, like, there's not supposed to be a break here, but we're putting a break in here?
I wish I'd
Because it's not a commercial. It's just a reminder for the soldiers to use this V-mail, which I did not know about, where they had to censor the soldiers' mail and then to save money, they would put it on microfiche and send it all off as photos. It was just a little bit of interesting history.
I loved it. It was a lot of fun. Not a classic. Stands test times? Yes, because it's Shadow. And it was, as you guys say, it was a fun comic book right there. That was a fun comic book listen.
Yeah, I agree that totally. That I think it, in fact, helps to stand the test of time is that it is so comic booky, and comic books themselves have become even more omnipresent since then.
I agree totally with you guys. I think it's not a classic, stands the test of time, really familiar structure, but with a lot of little details that make it pop. Things like the tragic origin of the supervillain, the characterization of Commissioner Weston. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Much, much, much better than Out of This World.
I can't believe you didn't call it a classic and the best radio show you've ever heard in your life. It's Peter Lorre introducing...
I'm judging The Shadow. Peter Lorre's a classic in everything.
Peter Lorre and The Shadow.
I have this on a loop, Peter Lorre talking about The Shadow. It's how I fall asleep.
It's your ringtone.
The only thing better for you is if Peter Lorre played The Shadow.
That might be too much.
Who knows what evil lurks in
Marco. The Shadow knows.
All right, Tim, tell him stuff.
Please go visit ghoulishdelights.com, the home of this podcast. Other episodes can be found there. You can comment on episodes, vote for what your opinion was. You can also get a hold of us through our social media links. You can just send us a message. It's a great way to let us know what you think, as well as if you have an episode you'd like us to listen to, let us know.
You can also go to patreon.com/themorals and support this podcast at whatever level you deem appropriate. You can also go to iTunes and write a review. We love reviews. You could write a review of this one with a framing sequence from Peter Lorre. I would love that so much.
And if you want to see us perform live, the Mysterious Old Radio Listening Society theatrical division, I guess is the best way to put it. But we do live recreations.
Really formalizing this organization.
This is a bunch of guys up on floor 9. You're in the Morals building. We do live recreations of old-time radio from the golden age of radio, and we also do original scripts in the style of and perform those right now. If you are listening in 2020, we are at Park Square Theater. That is our home, so please come see us in St. Paul, Minnesota. What do we got coming up next?
Next, we will be celebrating the centennial of Anthony Ellis, writer, actor, director from the old-time radio era, and we will be listening to The Abominable Snowman from Escape. Until then...
Look out!
Hey, careful with that laugh. Careful. You might scare somebody.